And now I'd like to present to you our next speaker, Professor Yehuda Bauer. I know it's often said one needs no introduction. He surely may be that. You have a set of bios in your program, and while his may be the fewest lines, he's surely probably among the most accomplished of any of the speakers participating with us yesterday and today. Academic advisor to Yad Vashem, Professor Emeritus of Hebrew University, member of the Israeli Academy of Science, seminal thinker and writer on the subject that has brought us all here. I'm delighted to present to you Yehuda Bauer.
Thank you, Andy. Let me start with two brief quotes. On January 17, 2009, Imam Muhammad Hussein Yaqub appeared on the Ar-Rahma TV station in Egypt and said, "If the Jews return Palestine to us, will we then start loving them? Of course not. First, they are infidels. Second, they are enemies. The Jews will never stop fighting us and killing us. Our war against the Jews is eternal. We shall fight them, defeat them, exterminate them, until not a single Jew remains on the face of the earth." And just exactly 3 weeks ago, on May 9, 2013, the Egyptian parliament member Muhammad al-Sarir declared on Al-Aqsa TV, which was watched by millions of Egyptian citizens, he said, "Take my heart, which has become as hard as steel, and use it to stone the Jews. Take it and use it to stone the Jews. We will meet them with a beating of the drums of jihad." Now the problem is, you see, that if you take the declaration, the sermons of John Chrysostomos of the Golden Tongue in Constantinople, Istanbul today, in the beginning of the 4th century of this era, one of the major church fathers, you will find exactly the same language. Exactly. If you take the Stürmer, which was referred to in one of the speeches here, a Nazi propaganda sheet edited by Judith Streicher, you find exactly the same thing. Exactly. Now, why the Jews? Why not all green-eyed men and red-haired women? So my brief is an impossible one, in 25 minutes or so, to deal with why, how, and what can we do about it. No way to do that. And I do not represent any government, not the Israeli government, not any other one. I don't represent any organization, not even my own, Yad Vashem. I represent only myself. And even that I sometimes doubt. Now, the answer to why was actually indicated involuntarily by 2 nights ago by Minister Naftali Bennett when he mentioned the book of Esther, scroll of Esther in the Bible. All of you know the story, of course. Ahasuerus, the Persian king, not a very effective king apparently, has a very evil advisor, Haman, who wants to annihilate the Jews. Now, Naftali Bennett obviously believes that that is a true story. Well, it isn't. Ahasuerus is the Aramaic rendering of the name of Chayashar Shah, a great Persian king, better known in the West as Xerxes, the one who tried to conquer Greece and failed. He ruled between 486 and 465 BC. Now, under his reign, benevolent reign, Ezra the scribe came to Jerusalem around 480 and re-established Jewish religion and culture. A few years later, around 470, a major official at his court, Nehemiah, was sent to Jerusalem, rebuilt the walls, re-established the city, and established a working administration of Judea. The Persians supported the Jews from the declaration of Cyrus in 536, which ended the Babylonian exile, and until they were defeated by the Greeks in 333 BC. They were supportive of the Jews. So how come this story? Where does this story come from? Well, the usual assumption of at least many of my colleagues is that this was written around 200 BC when the Greek Seleucids ruled Syria, and they did want to annihilate the Jews. Why? Because the Jews had a different culture. They would not see, could not see the Greek king as a god, nor worship idols, nor do other things that were demanded in order to unify Syria and the Syrian Empire at that point under the rule of the Greek Seleucid kings. And it says so in the book of Esther, in chapter 5. And it says there quite clearly, why should we annihilate the Jews? For they do not follow the laws and customs of the king. Hebrew, Datei HaMelech. You see, they were different. They were not better or worse, but they followed a different type of culture. And they could not agree to the kind of unification that was being forced upon them. So the only alternative would be to kill them. It's not that the Jews invented something that hadn't existed before. Monotheism is not a Jewish invention. It's an Egyptian invention of the 14th century BC. The Shabbat is a Babylonian invention. The word Shabbat is not Hebrew, it's a Babylonian, Shabbatu. But in Babylon, it was the privilege of the royal court and the high aristocracy to have a day rest every week. The Jews completely changed that. They changed the concept of monotheism. They changed the concept of the weekly, and in case of the ecology, every 7 years, the permanent kind of establishment of a kind of a new system, a new idea. They synthesized it. And they created something which was unusual, not better or worse, simply different. Now, had the Jews remained in this small country and continued working those terraces, that you can still see outside of your window, kind of acrobatic agriculture, that was what they did, then there would have been another oddity in the world. There are plenty of groups, ethno-religious groups in various places that have sort of unique cultural development. But they left, many of them stayed, many of them left. They were not expelled, that's another legend, that's nonsense. They left for various reasons that I have no time, obviously, to discuss. And they carried with them this culture on their backs, wherever they went. Now, anti-Semitism is not the same thing as Jewish history. Jewish history is not the history of anti-Semitism. In most places, at most times, Jews were not persecuted. But there was this underlying essential problem that they were different. So there was a latent enmity. And whenever there was a crisis, it didn't necessarily turn against the Jews, not at all, but it could turn against them. Now, we are here at a global forum. It's the wrong term. There is no anti-Semitism in India, in China. There is some in Japan, propagated by a very tiny percentage of Christians in Japan. Most Christians in Japan are very pro-Jewish and pro-Israel. So it's not in Japan either. It's not in Southeast Asia. There's no anti-Semitism in Thailand. There is no real understanding of the whole issue in Indonesia, although there is some radical Islam in Indonesia. So it's not global. Thank heavens for that. And non-monotheistic cultures don't have anti-Semitism, because monotheistic cultures, all three of them, are exclusivist. And if you don't believe in the particular interpretation of each culture, you will spend the rest of eternity in very unpleasant places. Polytheists have no such problems. So there were two very large Jewish communities in India, and in the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th centuries, there was a very large Jewish community in China as well. They were never persecuted because of their Jewish identity. They were sometimes hit over the head because they chose the wrong prince or king, to identify with, but not because they were Jewish. So you see, you have to put this in perspective. Now, anti-Semitism is a terrible disease, not of Jews. Jews are not responsible for anti-Semitism except in one respect, namely that they exist. This came to the ultimate expression in Nazism, where Jews were murdered for the crime of having been born. That's anti-Semitism. Now, you have a rebellion of Christianity and Islam against Judaism, because that's the origin from which they came. And why should a polytheist, a pagan, convert to either Christianity or Islam? Why shouldn't he go back to the origin where it all came from? So there was an inbuilt enmity that developed on top of this difference that is pre-Christian. What I told you before about the Greeks, that's before Christianity. So there was a rebellion of monotheistic religions against Judaism. Didn't always mean that they were persecuted, as I said. In fact, I can give you a very good example. In Western Europe, between the 5th and the 11th century, Jews had the same rights as everyone else. The Catholic Church wanted to persecute them, but most of the population was still pagan. So that didn't work. And Jews were equal in their rights. So, you see, it changes. Now, jump, fast forward to today. We have discussed here two types of anti-Semitism. In the Western world and the Muslim world. In the Western world, you have, schematically speaking, three types. The neo-Nazis, I don't know why we call them neo-Nazis, they are Nazis. There's nothing neo about them. They are the darlings of the media because that's action, they come with flags and so on and hit and whatever. They are there, they are a danger. I mean, Adolf Hitler started with 7 people in 1919, 1920. and 13 years later he was in power. So marginal phenomena can be very dangerous, and there are right-wing parties in Europe, not all of them are anti-Semitic, but most of them are, that could accept this thing wholesale and really cause much more trouble than they are causing already. And they are causing a lot of trouble. The second kind is the second and third generation of Muslim immigrants to Europe. You see, Europe is dying. There is a demographic catastrophe. There will be many less Russians and Germans and Italians and Spaniards and so on in another 20 years' time. So the population is aging, so they need new immigrants in order to provide them with the necessary standard of living. And the places where these immigrants can come from are, in part at least, in large part, from various parts of the Muslim world, from Africa, from North Africa, from the Middle East, from Pakistan, and so on. Now, most of the Muslim immigrants just want to make a living, want to advance in their societies. And they arouse opposition from the locals. That is what we call Islamophobia. And the more these immigrants are integrated into the local societies, the more this integration succeeds, the less the basis for anti-Semitic actions will develop. So Rabbi Baker mentioned Berlin 2004. You will remember that the Israeli delegation, at that time I was a representative of Israel, suggested and supported in that whole series of decisions a declaration against Islamophobia. Because the Israeli government at that time realized that this is one of the ways, not the main one of the paths that one has to pursue in order to fight anti-Semitism. But of course, there are many others and much more important ones, maybe, but Islamophobia certainly is one of them. Now, these young people are angry. They don't understand really anything about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But what they do understand is that they are discriminated against, that if you come with a Muslim-sounding name to some company, there will be less chance of you being accepted than if you are called Jim Brown. They are angry, so they take it out on someone who is well recognized, weak, and the propaganda that comes from the Middle East towards them persuades them to do so. The third type is, to my mind, the most dangerous one. It's a leftist type of anti-Semitism, leftist and liberal. You find it in the UK very strong, and in some other countries as well. There you have the attack on Israel as the Jewish state. There you have the declaration that it was a mistake to establish Israel. Mistakes have to be corrected. To correct that mistake means to abolish Israel. That means to kill the people who are here, because Israel cannot be abolished in any other way. Any liberal British or French or Dutch or any other European intellectual at universities who will declare that is in favor of genocide. This has got to be stated very clearly, very openly. It's a genocidal program. People here talked about the dangers to the state of Israel. I don't like that kind of a talk. We are pretty strong here. No, this is a plan of genocide. Now, any Israeli here will know the difference between a black scorpion and a yellow scorpion. A black scorpion is very, very unpleasant. If he bites you, it hurts. A yellow scorpion, in certain situations, can kill you. Western anti-Semitism is the black scorpion. Muslim anti-Semitism is the yellow scorpion. Now, it has been said here, we cannot fight anti-Semitism, neither in the Western world, certainly not in the Muslim world, by Jews. Jews cannot fight anti-Semitism. Jews can help in fighting anti-Semitism. Jews can provide material. Jews can invite others to Jews. We have to have allies. We cannot do it without them. We can do nothing without them. It's been tried before, in Germany, for instance. Between 1897 and 1933, a very large Jewish organization tried very hard to fight anti-Semitism. It was failure. What you need is those non- and anti-radical Muslims. What you need is Christians, atheists, secularists, whoever in Europe who will join, not because of our wonderful black or blue eyes, but because of their own interest. Anyone here heard about Maulana Wahiduddin Khan? Wahiduddin Khan is the spiritual leader of 150 million Muslims in India. He's the head of an Islamic cultural center in New Delhi. He speaks only Urdu. He's a radical anti-radical, a believing Muslim, a faithful Muslim. Anyone in the Israeli government has ever heard of him? We need allies like that. And as I said, not because of our wonderful eyes. My statement now may come as a surprise to those who don't know me, but I feel that the Holocaust provides a very strong argument for non-Jews to join the fight against anti-Semitism. You see, why did the Germans start the war? It wasn't because of economic, social, political, or military reasons primarily, although they did play a role. Primarily because of ideology. Now, is there documentation to prove that? Yes, there is. The top leaders of Nazi Germany declared, not in terms of propaganda, this was internal correspondence, that the world is threatened with a Jewish conspiracy. Jewish Bolsheviks in Moscow and Jewish capitalists in the Western world are under one blanket. They are one group. And what they want to achieve, and I am quoting, my friends, is to replace the leading strata of human society with international Jewry. Therefore, Hitler says in that memorandum, we need a war within 4 years. He said that in 1936, well, it came a bit earlier. World War II was primarily an ideological war. Hitler says it all the time. You know, when I say this, people come to me, did they really believe in this? These are people who are living today in the age of Khomeini in Iran. Do the Khomeini people really believe in the nonsense they are spreading? Of course they do. Do violent extremists of any kind, of any sort, anywhere, really believe in what they are saying? In most of the cases, yes, they do. The Nazis believed in what they were saying. World War II was done because of ideological reasons, at the center of which stood anti-Semitism. 35 million people died in World War II in Europe alone. 5.7 million of them were Jews. 29 million were non-Jews. The 29 million died largely because of anti-Semitism. Now, wouldn't you say that that's a good reason to fight anti-Semitism for any Pole or Frenchman or Italian or whoever? I think it's a very good reason. Anti-Semitism endangers the whole of humanity. Now, there were three ideologies like that in the 20th century: Bolshevism, Nazism, and radical Islam. As I said yesterday in one of the working groups, they arose in the same decade. 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution; 1919, Hitler's first political statement; 1928, the foundation of the Muslim Brotherhood by Hassan al-Banna, in one decade. As a result of the changes in industrial society at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. Now, there are differences between the three, obviously, and I won't go into that. But there are parallels, very close parallels in some cases. They are all three religions. Marxist-Leninism is a religion. Nazi ideology is certainly a religion. Muslim radicalism relies on what it interprets as a religion. All three are anti-national. They wanted to essentially abolish nationality or independence of nationality. The Bolsheviks, of course, except for the great Russian people, wanted in essence to unify all the nations. The Nazis, obviously. Radical Islam does not recognize Arab nationality, for instance. There is no such thing. Arab nationalism is out. Said Qutb and Hassan al-Banna himself were executed by the Egyptian regime because they were against Egyptian nationalism. And there are other kinds of parallels. Now, this is, you see, something that one has to internalize and one has to use also in the kind of interpretation, the kind of explanation and education that we should try to do. Now, what should be done about all this? I'm sort of skimming over things. It's very superficial, what I'm saying here. But just this point, you see. So, okay, so what should we do? Or as my friend Abe Foxman, who may be here in the hall, when he meets me, he says, no. So, what's the no? And what I always answer him is no. So, what is the no that I would suggest? Much of it actually has been proposed here in working groups and a platform here and so on. We need some centralization, we need some kind of a unified, or more or less unified, with all the differences between people, and that's okay, approach to this. We need essentially for the what we call the Global Forum to establish a permanent committee that will not direct but coordinate between the different groups. There are institutional rivalries that you can't abolish. There's no way to do that. You have to accommodate them. It's very difficult. I know because I have some experience in that, especially Jewish organizations. It's a very difficult task. It's not hopeless. Not entirely hopeless, put it that way. But difficult enough. So you need a coordination that everybody accepts, and then the division of labor. But the main thing is money. Because what I'm going to suggest costs money, lots of it. To ask the Israeli government to supply us with large sums of money is illusionary. They won't do it. To ask other governments is only slightly less so. Now, they may support the raising of funds. In other words, we don't pay you, or we only give you very small amounts, but we will support you if you go and raise the funds elsewhere. That's possible. That's why we have good people, non-Jews and Jews, who can be told what anti-Semitism means, who can perhaps be persuaded to provide money. For what? Well, things have been mentioned here. Education, which is central, of course, and so on. Why not have a TV station in Urdu, Farsi, and Arabic, organized and led not by Jews or Christians, but by Muslims, anti-radical Muslims, to broadcast into the Muslim world, which is not all radical at all. I told you 150 million Muslims in India, and there are many others. A commercial station with music, with fun, that will try at least to cover part of its expenses by being a commercial station, but publicly supported under some kind of a organization. Why not establish radio stations? Why not use, I'm suggesting this perhaps in the wrong forum, to the Israeli Air Force, why don't they distribute flyers? Why don't we use this was suggested here, the new social media? It's so easy, to establish a website, to publish within the social media in numbers, in large numbers. Swamp the bastards. Why do you wait? Now, there are some stations, there are some things that are being done, much too little to my mind. I think we need to go, to use a current Hebrew expression, to think outside of the box. As anti-Semitism is not going to disappear as a result of that. It's alive and kicking, and there will be plenty more work to do for our grandchildren. I can assure you of that. But we have to start somewhere, and we have to continue what is already being done. We might possibly be able to reduce it. We might possibly have all those huge countries with huge populations. I mentioned India and China. Join us in this effort if we manage to explain to them that this ultimately concerns them as well as everyone else. Now, you see, I don't believe in a good world. There is no such possibility. But I do believe in a tiny bit, slightly better world. It's worth spending one's lifetime to achieve that. So let's not exaggerate. I get the willies, to use a London expression, when I hear my government ministers declare the eternity of Jerusalem. There is no such thing. Jerusalem was founded as a village about 5000 BC. Ultimately, when humanity disappears from the face of this earth, as it undoubtedly will, as everything does. Eternity is a very long time, Don't use that term. So, slightly better. Now, what should be the guiding principles, the overall guiding principle? I would suggest two. One is that you need us academics, those people in the ivory towers. It's actually the politicians who are in the ivory towers and the academics who are on the street. But anyway, you need the theory, you need the analysis, you need need not only the facts, you need to understand the facts. So you need a theory-based approach. If it is not practical, it's useless. So you need those two things. If you want to deal with anti-Semitism, you cannot deal with it without going down into the swamp, into the political world of conflicting economic and political and military interests all over the globe. You can't do it without it. You've got to do that. You've got to realize that people have real economic and other worries. And you've got to accommodate them. You shouldn't fight them. The Americans have tried it in Vietnam, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. And they've been defeated. They had to be defeated. Because you can't fight evil or evil regimes simply only by force. And you can't impose a democracy on a people by force. So you need to accommodate, you need diplomacy, you need to understand the legitimate interests of the others. So you need a healthy measure of political cynicism in order to achieve your end. But if you are not motivated morally, then you are just one of those evil people that you want to fight. The motivation has to be moral. I am against the sermonizing, you know. I'm against the kind of thing that I'm doing here just now. I don't believe in sermons. They go into one ear and escape from the other ear. I leave that to Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama and Elie Wiesel and all the others. They are wonderful people, they do wonderful things, they make wonderful speeches, and that's that. No. You've got to be practical. And so my two principles are theory-based practicality. It's not my term, it's the term of Barbara Half. Theory-based practicality and morally motivated political cynicism. With that, we might possibly get somewhere. Thank you.